Thanks, Josh. Can you hear me? Because my
Yes.
my laptop quit, so I'm on my cell phone now. But anyway, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic, and thank you very much, Josh, for asking me to do this. It's always an honor and a privilege to get to speak at an AA meeting and try to be of service. I was going to wear a tie this evening, but I found that there's a little more of me than the last time I put a shirt on and a tie, and it wouldn't button up. Sorry. Oh, I'm fine. Anyway, I was on this meeting for the last couple of weeks, and you guys had a couple of great speakers, a couple of home runs hit out of the park. I'm hoping you get a bunt single this evening. But I'll tell you that I grew up in, let's start with a joke. You know, I know a lot of jokes. Well, I've heard a lot of jokes, but I can't remember most of them. So I'm just going to tell you one I remember. There's this Irishman goes into a bar and says to the bartender, "Let me have 5 shots of Irish whiskey." And the bartender comes up and lays them all down, and the guy says, "This one's for me, dear dad. This one's for me, brother. This one's for me, sweet sister Molly. This one's for my dear old mom, and this one's for me." And he does that like twice a week, week in and week out, for month after month after month. And finally, he comes in one day and he says to the bartender, "Let me have 4 shots of Irish whiskey." And the bartender's coming over to the bottle, but he gives him a look like, "What's going on?" He says, "Oh, I quit drinking." Anyway, like I was telling Josh earlier, I grew up in Syracuse, New York. If any of you have ever been there in the wintertime, you might think that's why I'm an alcoholic. I don't think it is. I had parents that were both alcoholics. I remember my sister and I hiding in a bedroom while they were having a argument, and I swore to myself I was never going to end up like them. But them being an alcoholic, I don't think that has anything to do with me being an alcoholic either. I think what has to be with my alcoholism is my drinking and my thinking. And I don't know when I had my first drink. I imagine I was probably around 10. Somebody asked me about that today and I think it was around 10, but I don't, I forgot to say that I have a sobriety date. Sobriety date is April 10th, 1985. I have a sponsor, as we've referred to, Frank, and I have a home group here in Snellville, Georgia, the Solution Group, and there's a lot of good members of that group. And I've had the experience of moving across last year. I have a home group here in Georgia. My wife and I moved from Northern California to Georgia here a year ago. And I'd like to say that a lot of people, when they move, they find it a little bit different in AA wherever they go to, but that's not been my experience. The AA here in Georgia is very good. They're all about the steps around here, and that's good. But anyway, I started drinking when I was about 10, and that's what I did. I drank. This guy up in Woodland, California, that was one of the old timers I met when I first got in AA, used to talk about it starts out with fun, then fun and trouble, and then trouble. And as best I can remember, it got to trouble pretty quick in my life, and it stayed that way for a long time. I don't remember having a lot of good times drinking, but it's what I did. It's all I knew how to do. And when I was getting into high school, I was drinking, and when I was in high school, I was frightfully afraid of everyone and everything, and the drinking helped me get over that. When I was in high school, when I was a sophomore in high school, I was a starting middle linebacker on the varsity football team. I always attributed it to me being from New York, and those soft California people couldn't play football like that. But anyway, I was doing pretty good at that, but I quit the team. And I always used to say I quit because I discovered Red Mountain wine and LSD. But the real reason I quit doing that is because I was afraid. I was afraid of the seniors, juniors, and seniors on the team, and I was intimidated by the coach. So it was easier for me just to quit doing something I really enjoyed doing and just go hang out in the railroad tracks and drink wine and smoke reefers, even though I didn't enjoy smoking the reefers too much. You know, I did a lot of that other stuff that we do that my friend Brian calls condiments on the hot dog of alcoholism. But the alcohol was always the main thing there. The tallest pole in the tent, as Howard Polans would say. It's the thing that I always went back to. This is kind of odd, talking to my cell phone, by the way. But anyway, so I was in high school. That's what I was drinking. I was getting out of towards the end of high school, and I got my first job. My first job was at, I think it was the original Renaissance Pleasure Fair. It was over in Novato, or Novato in California. And what it was is, I experienced it like a hippie carnival. It traveled around from there to Southern California. And there was just a bunch of people there. And what we did, what my booth, we did there is we sold beef ribs and smoked chicken and turkey legs. And what that meant for me was I had a 40-foot long barbecue pit that I worked behind, and I burnt a lot of that food, drank Jack Daniels, drank Budweiser beer, and snorted cocaine. And then at about 6 o'clock in the evening, we'd kick all the marks out of the fair, and then the party would really start. We'd party all night. It seemed like all night. And then about 5 o'clock in the morning, some guy would start playing the bagpipe, wake us up, and I'd do it over again. But that was a great job for me because it didn't entail much except drinking and partying. And it was a lot of fun, actually. I guess that's the time my drinking was fun. But I did that through high school and a little bit after that. And then, well, I had this girlfriend in high school. I don't know how I got a girlfriend, because I was so afraid of women in particular. But I got this girlfriend, and shortly thereafter, she broke up with me. And I decided I had to do something different. And I figured I'd move across the country. I had a brother who was an engineer, and he had moved from where we lived in California to Washington, D.C. and worked on the subway when they were building a subway there. And he'd moved down to Georgia because they were going to build a subway in Atlanta here. And I needed something to do, so he told me to come back there, and I could get a job working on the subway. And so I was on my first geographical, is what it turned out to be, because things weren't going good where I was. And I thought the grass would be greener and the wine would be sweeter somewhere else. So I moved to Georgia. And it's funny, you know, when I was at that Renaissance Fair, you know, there was a bunch of drinking and drug taking going on there. And I thought things would be different in Georgia. And I started working on building a subway, and it was basically the same thing going on there, except the people had a different accent. But I was in Georgia for a few years drinking and, you know, just working and drinking is what I did. I worked to get enough money to do the things I wanted to do. And somewhere during that time period, things were getting bad in Georgia. So I went back to California, and then things got bad there real quick. I came back to Georgia again. And, you know, I'd sit around in the bars in Georgia, and I'd tell people how cool it was out there in California and how neat things were there. And I'd go back there and I'd sit around drinking and telling people how hip it was there in Georgia. It was always better where I wasn't. But anyway, I went back to Georgia for the final time in sometime in 1979. And I moved in to I found out that this was being homeless years later, but I moved in with my brother and sister-in-law in this very little house they had in Petaluma, California, and they let me sleep on the couch in the living room. And I stayed there for a long time, and then I stayed there for a little longer time. And I was there for a long time, living on that couch. And when my sister-in-law was 8.5 months pregnant, they had the audacity to kick me out. You know, it really hurt my feelings. I couldn't understand why they would do that, but they did. And you know, I was working at that fair again, and I'd eventually gotten a laborers union out there in California. I worked for this company that I'd worked for a little bit in Georgia, and I became a ditch digger. And what I did is I made my paycheck and I spent it. I had this guy I worked with who was an equipment operator, and on Monday morning I'd always borrow $20 from him because I was broke. You know, I spent all my money, and then we got paid on Thursday usually, and on Friday I'd give it back to him. Then the next Monday I'd borrow it back from him, and that's just the way. I was always out of money, and just getting by paycheck to paycheck, and just doing what I did. And eventually, when I was in Petaluma, I started dating this gal I'd known in high school, and we partied well together. And she decided we wanted to get married, or she wanted to get married, and I didn't know what that entailed. I didn't know there was responsibilities that came with that. So I agreed to get married. She wanted to get married in a church. We got married in a bar. We got married in the Marshall Tavern on Tomales Bay, in this bar, and that was and then she had a son that was probably about 3 years old when we got married from a previous marriage. And shortly thereafter, we had a couple more kids. And like I said, I didn't realize there was a responsibility went along with that. We lived, you know, we lived in, I like to say, because it's true, in Sonoma County. I lived in damn near every town in Sonoma County. I lived in Healdsburg twice, Cloverdale twice, Windsor, a lot of places you people probably haven't heard of. But we ended up, in 1984, we were living in Santa Rosa, California. And I got a drunk driving ticket. And I'd gotten drunk driving tickets before, but this one, they did something different. They wanted me to go to Alcoholics Anonymous to get the little paper signed. And I didn't know what Alcoholics Anonymous was. And I didn't know if it was related with the police or the court system. And I didn't know if there was a camera in there to make sure I was there. I didn't know I could forge the paper. So I went to this meeting, and the meeting was coincidentally like 2 doors down from the bar I was pulling into when I got the last drunk driving ticket. I pulled in the bar, and the cops pulled in behind me, and I started walking towards the bar, and I was wondering what they were there for, and I found out before I got to the door. But anyway, I went into this AA meeting, and the people were kind of scary looking and intimidating, so I went to the back of the room and sat against the wall, and I bumped my head on a picture frame. And I turned around and I looked at this picture frame, and there's a statement in it. It said that feeling of impending doom is impending doom. And like I said, I didn't have any idea what Alcoholics Anonymous was, and I didn't know what alcoholism was, but I knew what that feeling was. I'd been feeling it for a long time in my life. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and wonder how my life got to be the way it was. And, you know, I didn't know there was any, I didn't know what my problem was. I just didn't know how to get on to this world. And I thought, and then drinking was the thing that helped me with that. I thought, you know, basically I drank at the second part of the first step. I drank at the unmanageability of my life, which usually manifested itself in you people, you know, my wife, my boss, the police, the IRS, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's what I drank at, get the heat off from all that stuff. So anyway, I went to these meetings at that place, and usually I went to the liquor store on the way home. And I remember I was sitting around with my brother one time drinking and doing some other stuff, some of that condiment stuff that we used to do. And I was telling him how good that AA was for them people. So anyway, I went to those meetings. I got that paper signed and I got that commitment done. And that was in '84. And my wife and I were living in Santa Rosa with our kids, and there was these bad drunks living next to us. I mean, they're always fighting. Cops were at their house a lot, and they're just a mess. And whenever we wanted to go out drinking, we'd drop our kids off with them and go out drinking. It occurred to us when we were sober one time that probably wasn't too good of an idea. So we decided that we needed to move away from there because obviously that neighborhood was the problem. I had a buddy I worked with who lived in Dixon, which is it's out in a valley in central California. It's a little farm town. It's flat. And the area I was living in Sonoma County is where all the redwoods are, and it's real picturesque and beautiful. So my ex-wife and I drove to Dixon to check it out, and we're getting there, and she says, there's no way in hell I'll ever live in this godforsaken place. And 2 weeks later, we had an apartment there in Dixon because, alcohol was pushing us there, And everywhere I went when I was drinking, it says in the big book, a fellowship will grow up amongst you if you start doing these things we do in AA. But what happened to me, everywhere I went, a fellowship of sons of bitches and circumstances grew up around me, and things got pretty miserable. So I had to move again. So anyway, we moved to Dixon, and, I like to say that when I was in Atlanta, Georgia, I used to hang out at this bar called Rosie's Cantina. It was somewhere in downtown Atlanta. And one time, I think it was in 1976 or 77, I went in there and I did not drink on a Monday and a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, and a Friday. And I celebrated that on Saturday by drinking. And from then until when I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I know there must have been some days that I was too sick to drink. And there's probably a couple of times I was trying to stop, but most every day I drank. And that's just what I did. And every once in a while I went out and did something that's really, really screwed things up. And that's what I did when we got to Dixon. It was in early April, and I'd gotten a job down near in Burlingame, south of San Francisco. I hadn't had any work through the winter, and I got a job with this outfit that was putting in these pilings for a building, and I was working for them for a week and a half. And in the second week, you don't get paid till this following week. And the day we were going to get paid, the pile hammer broke down. So we got off work early, and I got my paycheck. And I thought to myself, if I hurry home, I'll get home before the old lady expects me, and I can drink more before I got to show up at the house. And I got my paycheck, right? So I took off in my car. My friend, a friend of mine out in California said he had a 2-bedroom Buick. Well, I had a 2-bedroom old BMW, and I didn't spend much money on preventative maintenance. So there's a plume of smoke going out the back of the thing. And the way I got places, I wasn't smart enough to get a cooler. So wherever I was, I'd buy a couple beers and I'd drive until they ran out, and I'd pull off and get a couple more, and then I'd drive until they ran out. And I was doing that. I was working my way from South San Francisco back up to Dixon with a plume of smoke going out the back, getting me a couple beers and driving a little further and getting a couple more. And I'm driving through Berkeley, and a highway patrolman comes alongside me and gets on his microphone and says, "Get that thing off the road." So I did. I went off, pulled off, got a couple more beers, and I got all the way up to Vallejo, which is about 30 miles from where I live, and my car blew up. And I couldn't call my wife and have her come get me in our other car because we didn't have another car. We didn't spend our money on stuff like that. I spent my money on drugs and alcohol. And my one friend I had in Dixon, I called him, but his wife had his car, and he didn't have another car either. So I hitchhiked down this side road into Vallejo, and the guy who picked me up hitchhiking cashed my paycheck. I don't know how he was able to do that, but he cashed my paycheck. And I went to this place called the Popcorn Tavern. And I went in there and tried to figure out how I was going to get home. There wasn't any bus that went that way from there at that time. And I finally called my brother, who lived in, another 40 miles from there, and asked him to give me a ride home. And I don't think I called my wife and told her where I was yet, by the way. I didn't do that kind of stuff. And my brother didn't want to come get me because he was having dinner. I told him I'd buy him some drugs if he came and got me. So he came and got me and took me home after we had a few drinks. And when we got to the town I lived in, we didn't go to my house. I had him go someplace else. Anyway, we never went to my house. I had him take me back to another part of California, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And when I finally got home, after I had him drop me off back in Dixon, and I stayed in the bar till it closed up. And when I finally got home, my wife opened the door and said, "If you don't think I'm leaving, you can count the days I'm gone," or some other line from a country western song. Took the kids and left. And I passed out with the TV on. And back at that time, they had this movie about a nuclear holocaust called The Day After, or The Morning After, or something like that. When I came to the next morning, that movie was playing, and it was appropriate. But anyway, I hitchhiked down to where my car is and realized it was really destroyed. And I had enough money to get a bus back up to Dixon, but I wouldn't have had enough money to get any cigarettes if I did that. So I got some cigarettes and I hitchhiked back to Dixon, or close to it. My friend came and got me in Vacaville, and he took me to this place called George's Orange, which is a Mexican restaurant in Dixon. And he bought me a beer, and he told me I could go into this place that the union we were in would pay for, and I could rest up there, and it would appease the old lady, and then the union would pay for it. And it took him 3 or 4 beers to talk me into going to this place. And what it was called the Care Unit. It was in Sacramento. It was one of them places where they carry you to AA meetings and show you people with cirrhosis that have yellow skin. And I'm sure they did other stuff, but the main thing they did for me is they said I had to go to AA to learn how to live my life on a day-to-day basis. And they gave me phone numbers when I was getting ready to get out of there of people in Alcoholics Anonymous in the area that I lived in. And I called this guy in this town of Woodland. Turns out his name was Guy. And he says, "I bet you're a quart short." And I didn't know what he's talking about. I said, "I destroyed my car." And he said, "I'm not talking about your damn car. I bet you're not done drinking." I said, "Oh, yeah, I am." Because by that time, I'd been to some meetings, and I didn't know if I wanted what you people had, but I know I didn't want what I had. And he said, "You know how many people have called me from that place you're in?" And I said, "No." He said, "Probably 100. He said, "You know how many I've seen in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous after they got out of there?" I said, "No." And he said, "Not a goddamn one, and I won't see you either." So I made a point of going to the Woodland group of Alcoholics Anonymous and looking this guy up. And he didn't tell me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, which is good advice if you do a little more than that. And he didn't tell me to take what you need and leave the rest, which you used to hear a lot. And he didn't tell me, you know, it's a selfish program, which you used to hear a lot too. And I understand what they mean when they say that, but I think it's a pretty selfless program. But what he did is he appointed me a sponsor in the town I lived in. And I never knew you could pick your own sponsor because he appointed me one. And I went down and talked to this guy he appointed as my sponsor. This guy's name was Kenny. I didn't like Kenny because he was a truck driver. And I didn't like truck drivers in the industry I was in. Truck drivers didn't follow directions good. If you told them to dump some material there, they dump it over there. So I didn't like all truck drivers, you know, not that I was closed-minded. And this guy was a truck driver, so I didn't care for him. And, you know, he was a Beatles fan, and I was contemptuous about the Beatles. I'm a Rolling Stones fan. He was a Oakland A's fan. I was a San Francisco Giants fan. He was a Raiders fan. I was a 49er. I didn't like the guy, but I was pretty desperate. And he told me that you can't, he said, you can do anything you want to in Alcoholics Anonymous as long as you're willing to pay the price for it. But he said, you can't be a victim in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, you can't hang around Alcoholics Anonymous and get well and then do the steps. You have to do the steps in order to get well. And then he sat me down with the big book and the 12 and 12, and we started going through them and doing that thing. And I will say that I didn't like that guy at that time, but he passed away in 2008. And by that time, he was like a brother to me. And my wife and I are the godparents of his children, and he meant a lot to me. He saved my life. I wouldn't be breathing in and out if it wasn't for him and a lot of other people in Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyway, despite him being all that, I'd follow him around for about the first year and did everything he told me to do. And I'd ask him a question and he'd give me an answer. But eventually, you know, I'd ask a question, I'd question the answers I was getting from him a while down the road. And, you know, I should say that, you know, I was raised in a certain religion and went to a certain religious school up until I was in high school. I'm not going to say the name of the religion, but I'm half Irish and half Italian, so you might be able to figure it out. But I never, it's like I had saran wrap around me. I never got any idea from that experience about this God thing. And by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was contemptuously self-righteous about the hypocrisy I thought I saw in religion. So when I came in at AA, I'd nod my head up and down when they talked about a higher power, but really I was very agnostic, if not an atheist, and I wasn't buying into that stuff. And I was basically, after the first couple of years when I followed Kenny around, did everything he told me, I was basically doing AA like this. You know, I'd listen to you people about not drinking, and I'd listen to him about not drinking, but as far as managing my life and my finances and my romances and that kind of stuff, I was doing it the way I wanted to. And I didn't get this higher power thing. And consequently, in the first 10 years I was in AA, I was divorced twice. The mother of my children and I came in the program, and we both came in basically at the same time. And a few years into it, she'd quote that line in a big book about the farmer coming up out of the cellar after the tornado, saying, "Ain't nothing wrong here, Ma." I used to wonder what the hell she was talking about, but I wasn't doing this stuff right. We got divorced, and it was all me. You know, I screwed things up pretty bad. And then I got married again and divorced again. And when I was going to get married to this other gal, my sponsor was talking to me about it, and he was trying to suggest that maybe I shouldn't do it. And that was my end of my relationship with him for a while. And then I had to go back to him later with my tail between my legs and ask him if he was still my sponsor. He said, "I didn't go anywhere, you did." But anyway, somewhere about 8 or 9 years into this program, I was drifting from AA because I wasn't doing what you got. I wasn't drinking and I wasn't changing. And I've seen a lot of people do what I did and get drunk again. I just figured God knows what kind of sissy I am, so he wouldn't let me get drunk again. But it was getting pretty miserable. I was just as miserable as I had been before I quit. And I'd moved around a little bit, did a little geographics in AA. And one day I was driving home from work, and I got a phone call from that guy. And I don't know how he got my phone number, because I was avoiding him because I owed him some money. You know, I borrowed some money from him to get out of a mess I was in, and I hadn't paid him back yet. I was gonna, but I hadn't done it yet. So I was avoiding him. And he gave me a very spiritual message. It was laced with a lot of profanity, but nonetheless, it was a spiritual message. Basically, what he said was, when are you going to give me back the money you owe me? And when are you going to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous and give back what was so freely given to you? And then this other guy got in touch with me, this guy, Jimmy, who lives in Woodland, California. And him and I came in the program within a couple of days of each other. And he heard that I was avoiding meetings a lot. And he called me and basically said the same thing: you need to get back to AA. So I came back into AA, even though I guess I didn't tell you why I wasn't going to this one group, because my ex-wife was going to the same group, and I had to pay her all this alimony and child support, and it was more than I was making, and it wasn't fair. And I went up to my grand sponsor and I said, "I want justice." And he said, "Kid, you better forget about justice. Pray for mercy." But anyway, I was drifting away, and I finally went back, and I went into AA, back into the rooms of AA with my tail between my legs, and I let you people in, because that's the thing I hadn't done. I hadn't let you people in. I have to go back and tell you about this meeting I went to. I didn't go to meetings in Davis, California. It's a university town, and it's too artsy craftsy for me. I'm a blue collar worker, so I didn't go to meetings there. Not that I'm closed minded, but this guy Harvey Earl, who was the old timer in Woodland, was going to speak there. And I liked what Harvey had to say, so I was going to go listen. Harvey said all this great stuff. He said, if I want to be called Mr. Earl, I best act like Mr. Earl. And he said, peace of mind is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it. I've since been told that that's from Socrates, but I know that's not true. It's from Harvey Earl. And there was this other old timer in a woodland group called Blackie Truitt. And when I first went to meetings, he looked at the group, but I know he was looking at me, and he said, if your way of living your life is working so goddamn good, what are you doing here? And I didn't like that, but I heard it. But he also said, you can't change the mind you have with the mind you have. And since then, I've heard that's from Albert Einstein, but I think it's from Blackie Truitt. But anyway, I went to this meeting in this town I didn't go to listen to Harvey, because I like what he said. And during his talk, he said, there's only 3 things you need to know about God. He said, you're not him. And if you look at your behavior, you can figure that out pretty good. He said he's not lost. He works through people. And that's been my experience when I'm aware of what's going on me, that God has worked through people in my life forever. And he said another thing. He said he won't do for you what you can do for yourself. And at the time, I understand what he was saying, and I believed it at that time, but I don't believe that anymore. I think God does everything for me. And I was hearing that was good for me, because when I finally come back into AA, I let you people in. And when I let you people in, I let this God thing into my life. And a couple things happened real shortly after that kind of convinced me more about this God thing. The first one is my mother is well into her 80s and been sick for a while. And she was in a hospital in San Rafael, California. And I was supposed to go pick her up and take her home one day. And I went to pick her up. And when I got there, things were a lot worse than we had thought. And the doctor said, she's not doing well. And my sister showed up, excuse me, and he said, she's probably going to die if we don't do anything. And if we try to do the surgery that might save her, it might kill her. So you guys got to make up your mind what to do. So we decided to have the surgery done, and she didn't make it through the surgery. So what I did after that meeting that event, I went to an AA meeting, and then I went home. And at that time, it was after the second divorce, and I was living by myself out in the country, 1,000 miles from nowhere, in my one-room country shack, kind of. And I got home and I went to bed, and about 3:30 in the morning, I woke up, and I was frantic and full of anxiety, wondering if we'd made the wrong decision about my mother. And I'm sitting there in this house, this dark house all by myself, and I heard a voice. And it said, your mother's okay. She's with me. And since then till now, I've never had any anxiety or fear about that situation again. And that happened. And shortly thereafter, my niece called me. She was here in Georgia, and she wanted me to come out here and do an intervention on my brother, my older brother, who was 11 years older than me, who was the engineer. He was very successful in his material life. He had all this stuff. You know, he was my older brother. He's basically my father figure, because my old man wasn't around too much. And he was my mentor in what I did for a living. He had a very high IQ, and he was very successful. And I'm a ditch digger, right? So when I'm flying to Atlanta to help do this thing, I'm thinking about that, and I perceive us to be on different planes, and I figure I need someone more on his plane to help do this intervention. So when I got to Atlanta, I had my niece and nephew take me to an AA meeting. I'm not sure where it was somewhere probably within a 20-mile radius of where I lived. And I went to this meeting, and I was looking for someone to help me do this intervention on my brother. And this guy walks in, and I know him. And I'm trying to figure out where I know him from, because this is like 97, and I hadn't been in Atlanta since 79. And turns out I knew him from Alcoholics Anonymous in Elk Grove, California. And he was a businessman. And he was in Atlanta taking a business class over the weekend. And he wasn't going to go to that meeting I was at, because it was a smoking meeting, but he lost the map he had to the non-smoking meeting. And he was just exactly who I was looking for. And the next day, he went and helped me do this intervention on my brother. And unbeknownst to my niece, she had a Catholic priest involved in the deal who was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we did this intervention, and my brother went into a treatment place, and he stayed sober for a while. And then he started drinking again. And a year or two later, I had to come back to Atlanta and watch him shake around in his hospital bed for 3 days with yellow skin and yellow eyes and die of alcoholism. And the last thing he ever said to me was, I wish I stayed in AA, my kids still need me. But the point of all that is this higher power thing that I didn't believe in gave him an opportunity. He didn't take, he put all these things together to give him an opportunity, and he didn't take advantage of it. But all of us people on this meeting got that same opportunity. So anyway, that happened. And when I let you people, you know, I love that sentence in the big book that says, "are rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence." Because when I let you people into my life, it was like another stage of my time in AA. Things started getting a lot better when I was actually doing this stuff. And a couple other things happened along the way. My original sponsor was, I better hurry up here. My original sponsor was getting ill, so I had this problem at work. You know, I was a great communicator at work. I thought I was in a position of authority over some people, and I communicated so well with this one individual. He's not only sued the company we worked for, he sued me individually. And I went to this guy, Joe Myers, who was one of my heroes in AA, and went through the steps on this situation. And a lot of people were telling me this guy was just trying to get some money, and I didn't do anything wrong, but rubbed my nose in this situation and pointed out that I learned how to communicate with people on a construction site, and sometimes that's not the best way to talk to people, and I have to have a little more respect for people than that. And that started changing in my life. But one other thing that Joe did for me is he got me to start meditating. You know, I'd nod my head at meditating, but I never really did it until then. And almost instantaneously, when I started meditating, there was less sons of bitches on the job site. And, you know, that Joe passed away right after the International in 2010 in San Antonio. He was a great man. And shortly thereafter, I had another sponsor for a while who passed away. And Frank, who's on this meeting, I'd known for, I don't know, many, many years in Alcoholics Anonymous. He had it kind of at a distance, but I kept my eye on him. And eventually, when I needed another sponsor, I asked Frank to be my sponsor. And we had some things in common. His sponsor was someone at that time was Sandy Beach, and I admired him. And we Frank and I went to Tampa to go to one of Sandy's retreats there one time. And Frank was driving, and I had the map. We didn't have a GPS system, and I got us way lost. And I told him that this was like the Italian airline pilot. He says, I got a good news and I got a bad news. Good news, we're making really good time. The bad news, I don't know where the hell we are. But anyway, we had a good time at that deal. And Sandy Beach and people like that who are so involved in the spiritual aspects of this program really changed the course of my life and my time in AA. That guy, Joe Myers, used to say that the spiritual part of the program is like the wet part of the ocean. I believe that's true, but I believe if that's true, then the spiritual part of life is like the wet part of the ocean. And, you know, the 12th step says having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And what that means to me, I can encapsulate the best by reading this short paragraph from the Member's Eye View of AA. It's a great pamphlet. And I'm going to read this paragraph real quick because I think this is what we're meant to get in AA, and I think it's what I've gotten in AA. It says, should this hard-won understanding of and feeling for others be confined to the meeting halls and members of AA, or does it remain for me to take what I have learned and what I have experienced, not only in AA, but in every other area and endeavor of my life, to lift my head and to assume my rightful place in the family of man? Can I there, in the household of God, know that I'm not sitting next to another white man, another Catholic, another American, nor yet a Frenchman, Mexican, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, black man, or brown, not even another alcoholic. And can I finally, at long last, please God, come home from all the wars and say in the very depths of my soul, I'm sitting next to another human being. Sure seems like we could all use a whole bunch of that right here and right now. But anyway, I'm so grateful for ending up in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know how to do anything until I ended up with you people, and you've taught me anything. I've had heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous. Frank is one of them. Bob there in Rio Vista is another one. And it probably, I can only see a couple of you because I'm doing this on my phone because my laptop canceled. But this is a great deal that happens to us in this program if we're willing. And it took me some time to become willing to let you people in and let this God thing. And it's been a good deal since then. And, there used to be this guy in Woodland. When he first came in the program, I didn't like very much. And after he got sober a while, he started saying this thing, and he used to say it. He used to say it, and I'd roll my eyes, and eventually we became friends, and I actually started hearing what he was saying. And what he used to say is, "God's the answer. What's the question?" And that is the deal in this life that I'm living, and I think we all are in this program, is God's the answer. What's the question? And, I'm going to shut up now, but I'm going to say a couple things about, there's a musician I like in Texas, and he says in one of his songs, "In the days when I keep my gratitude higher than my expectations, I have really good days." And I have another musician I like who's John Lee Hooker. And I don't know what John Lee Hooker would say about God, but he might say, "He's in you. He's got to come out. So let him boogie." Thanks you.